Welcome to our Friday live stream, which is called This Week in Cannabis News, powered by our friends at Dutchie. Each Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, we deliver an overview of this week's cannabis news. It's quick, it's comprehensive, it sends you into the weekend as a more informed cannabis professional, and it's all made possible by our friends at Dutchie. And you can find and connect with the team there through a link in the show notes, and let's get to it. The bill in Pennsylvania to legalize cannabis, which passed the House last week, failed to pass the Senate this week, and Governor Josh Shapiro wasn't happy about it. In a radio interview following the defeat of the bill in the Senate, he said, "Look, I've been clear about this for years. Pennsylvania needs to compete, and we're surrounded by states that have legalized, and they're reaping the benefits. I think this is an issue of liberty. I think it's an issue of economic opportunity and competitiveness. And I've put forward now, during my time as governor, multiple times, the key goals of any legalization bill." So the cannabis drama continues in the Keystone State. President Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Drug Enforcement Administration, Terrence Cole, declined to specifically endorse reclassifying cannabis as a Schedule III drug in written testimony. This according to Marijuana Moment. Last month, Cole, in their confirmation hearing in the Senate, said restarting the rescheduling process would be one of his first priorities, though he didn't indicate where the process would end up. New York added more full-time cannabis industry jobs than any other state, according to a new report from Vanks, which is a cannabis recruitment firm. The state added 8,450 jobs last year for a total of 12,500, which is a 209% increase over 2023, so growing strong. New York's job growth was followed by New Jersey, which added 2,763 jobs, and Ohio, which added just under 2,500 jobs. The report noted that overall the cannabis industry supports 425,002 jobs in the U.S., down 3.4% from last year, amid consistent regulatory challenges and what Vanks says are companies shifting to leaner operations. You'll remember each week we share exclusive insights from Cultivated's official insights partner, Lit Alerts, in our Tuesday newsletter. This week, Lit Alerts shared leading brands by unit sold across key cannabis categories by borough in New York City. You can see who's winning, where, and in what categories in New York City through a link in the comments. But here's a look at Manhattan. It's interesting to note, Dank by definition and Heirloom appear as category leaders in each of the boroughs Lit Alerts presented. Again, more of that in a link. And one fun thing, Whoopi Goldberg is launching a hemp-derived THC drink called Whoop Tea. She'll unveil the product at the Cannabis Means Business Conference in New York City this month, and it seems like an Arnold Palmer, but with THC, which we are certainly interested in. And in case you missed it, last week, right after we delivered the news in This Week in Cannabis News, our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Burke, chatted with Curaleaf chairman and CEO Boris Jordan on Cultivated Live. Now, Jordan discussed his opposition to the $15 million fee that Curaleaf and other existing medical cannabis operators must pay in New York to convert up to 3 stores from medical to recreational. He specifically said, "I feel like it's a racket." You can see that clip for yourself right now.
So in other words, they are basically, it's like an extortion thing. It's almost, I feel like it's a racket, you know, pay the fee and you can play. But by the way, we're going to make the fee so high, you can't make any money in your business. And by the way, we're not even going to regulate the market to help you make money. We're going to allow these illicit operators. So by the way, Curaleaf and GTI and the others have to finance the illicit operators is what we're doing.
Thank you again, Boris Jordan, for joining us last week. And as a follow-up today, our editor-in-chief here at Cultivated, Jeremy, has a conversation with Katie Neer and Ngiste Adebe from the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association to talk about that same fee, how it came to be, what it means for medical operators in New York, and how the industry is responding. Hold tight, and I'll share that conversation. It's about 20 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cultivated Live. I'm Jeremy Burke, your editor-in-chief. Today, we're going to talk about the New York market. Last week, and just a little preamble before getting discussion, last week, Governor Kathy Hochul codified a $15 million fee that existing medical cannabis operators in the industry must pay to convert their stores to adult use. I'm here with Katie Neer of Dickinson Avella, Ngiste Adebe from Kind Group Consulting and the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association. Just to start off, Katie, could you just introduce yourselves to our viewers and talk a little bit about your experience in the New York market?
For sure. Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Good to be here. So I am a regulatory lawyer and lobbyist here in New York who works primarily with the cannabis industry. Have clients of all different shapes and sizes and licenses here in New York, but I do a lot of work with the Medical Cannabis Industry Association. We call it the MCIA, and it does represent the operating medical companies here in New York. We call them ROs, or registered organizations.
And then Ngiste, to you, please. Just introduce yourself a little bit. Give us the elevator speech.
Sure. Ngiste Adebe. I'm a co-founder of K&D Group, along with Katie and our partner Dina. And I am a policy expert. I've followed cannabis policy for about, 15 years now, and have worked on it with companies and with the state governments and local governments and community partners all up and down the cannabis ecosystem. So really excited to be here today.
Yeah. So this fee is controversial, to say the least. We had, viewers may know, we had Boris Jordan, the CEO of Curaleaf, on, who did not mince words. He called it a racket. After we posted that, we heard from others who very much took the opposite side of the issue, saying the fee wasn't high enough. So from the medical cannabis industry operator perspective, and then Ngiste, maybe start with you, what is the genesis of this fee? Why is it in the budget? And how are you thinking about how to advise around it?
I mean, the root of this fee is a core bargain, right? That's been a part of legislative attempts at adult use legalization, which is, in order to preserve patient access and the medical program, you include the medical program. And in order to acknowledge the advantages that some of the medical operators might have, to then require a fee that typically is allocated to some priority that the state has set. In New York, it was around equity and repairing past harms from prohibition, and focused on both business support for new licensees, like our card operators, and the very large number of many different types of social equity and C licensees that the OCM program will have. But also, community reinvestment. It's not just about cannabis businesses. It's about putting money back into communities that were harmed by prohibition. And again, preserving the medical program for patients, which in New York has always been a struggle. And now, because of the choices that were made around the medical operators, patients are losing access.
Katie, can you talk about some of your work, as the budget was getting finalized in the prior weeks, negotiating on this issue, right? Because obviously the medical cannabis operators, they may look like big out-of-state publicly traded companies if you're unaware, but when you look at the balance sheets, $50 million is a very, very large fee for them to pay. So talk about some of the work you've been doing over the past few weeks.
For sure. I definitely was working on behalf of the MCIA to try to get that fee codified at a significantly lower number. I was not successful in doing that, clearly, right? I think, I've definitely seen some comments from other stakeholders saying that this is a 25% reduction from where the fee started, right? The fee started at $20 million, adopted in regulation. That proved too prohibitively high as well, right? So of the 10 companies that could have pursued a vertically integrated license in the adult use market here in New York and paid that original $20 million fee, only 4 of them started to move down that path. I think that indicates pretty clearly, objectively, right, that the $20 million number was too high. Several things happened in between that $20 million number getting adopted in reg and last week's enactment of the fee getting codified at 15 million. Some of those things included individual ROs reaching out to the regulator to try to get a payment plan or some other sort of accommodation to pay that $20 million in a more reasonable schedule or something along those lines, right? There was no engagement really with those efforts. And so ultimately MCIA did file a lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of that fee. And then, kind of predictably, right, here we are with the fee getting codified in the budget, which obviously is a tactic and a strategy that government can do when they're trying to moot or get rid of a lawsuit.
And just on that front, and I'll let both of you chime in here. I think it's a really salient point that only 4 organizations want to pay this fee, right? So it seems, I again, I'm not in government, I'm not a regulator, but it seems from an outside perspective that there's a lower fee that could actually drive more revenue in a much more simple way. And so I just wonder if, Ngiste, I saw you nodding, so jump in there. Like, I wonder if those conversations are being had.
0% of 15 million is still 0.
Right.
So yeah, I think that like you can put all the numbers on paper that you want as a government, but the question is, have you accurately reflected reality? And I think in addition to the fact that only 4 ROs have been able to afford that transition, you have the fact that multiple ROs, you've had 1 RO just turn in their license, and you've had multiple ROs close down their dispensaries because, as ROs said, during legalization, as every other state before New York recognized, you have to include medical. If you care about patients, then you have to support the medical program through the adult use transition. And, I think that with this decision, it's really clear where the governor's priorities lie, and it doesn't appear to be with patients.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, who gets hurt here, right? Like, New York City's medical cannabis market has already been struggling in the face of the adult use or recreational market. Patients want certain products that aren't necessarily available in adult use dispensaries. So who does this policy affect? And why should, someone who maybe doesn't work for a registered organization care about this?
If you don't mind if I jump in on one point, Katie, and then I'll hand it over to you. To your point about products that aren't necessarily available in the adult use market, there are products that are required to be stocked on the shelves in the medical program. They are required to have balanced THC CBD ratios and high CBD formulas, and again, required by law and regulations to maintain all of those formulations. Also, it's the only place a pediatric patient can go to get product. It's the only place the parents of a pediatric patient can go to legally take care of their child. And so I think I'm going to hit that point specifically, that the adult use marketplace does not meet the needs of many of the most vulnerable patients who have come to rely on. And especially given how patient numbers have dwindled, the patients that are left are deeply relying on the medical program at this point, and they are losing access to it. And it is not access that is going to be replaced by the adult use program. But Katie, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's an important point on the impact of patients. And I think that should be centered in the conversation, right? I think patients and consumers kind of habitually are getting left behind in the policy discussions here in New York. That's sort of a big macro note. I would just love for the patient consumer experience to be centered. From there, smart policy will come. Aside from patients, or maybe in addition to patients being harmed by this codification of a fee that is just facially unreasonable, right? Are the medical operators, clearly, right? And that's arguably the intent. I think that's pretty clear. The intent is to keep them out of the adult use market. The $20 million fee served that purpose. Of course, this fee will serve that purpose as well. I know that they're not the most sympathetic stakeholder in New York, and so I understand that. But the other big stakeholder group that's in a pickle here is the social and economic equity licensees and applicants. So the original cannabis law here in New York contemplated this pathway for medical operators to transition into the adult use market, vertically integrated with a lot of guardrails, in exchange for it was always understood to be a significant special licensing fee. And that licensing fee in the law originally was mandated to be sufficient or adequate to fund the social and economic equity plan, basically. And so in my worldview, what should have happened is the Office of Cannabis Management and the Cannabis Control Board should have published a social and economic equity plan with actionable items in it and a budget. And then that budget should have determined a per RO fee for transitioning into the adult use market vertically integrated. That did not happen, right? That's not what happened to defend that $20 million fee in the first place, which is what led to litigation, right? In this instance, I think the team negotiating this fee on behalf of the governor were sort of starting from scratch. I don't think that they were necessarily coming up with a number that could then translate into adequate funding for social and economic equity programs, because arguably, how can you put a price on those programs, right? Like the sky is the limit if you do it that way. I think that they were motivated to try to deal with the litigation through the legislation. And I think that they also clearly have a policy goal of keeping the medical operators out of the adult use market. I think my wish is that they would have just said that, right? They could have just codified that. Then we would at least all be kind of operating from the same foundation, and we could have a real conversation about the impact to the medical market and what should happen next if the state does care about that. The reality of this is the medical market's going to continue to shrink. And if the medical market is a policy priority for New York State decision makers, then we're having a conversation about how to rebuild it pretty much from the ground up. I've been around in the cannabis industry for a long time. I know a little bit about a lot of markets. I know a lot about New York. I've never seen it happen. I've never seen a market rebuild a medical market from the ground up after an adult use market's launched. I'm committed to being a part of that, though, right? Like my entire to-do list from now through the end of session is going to be solely focused on making this medical market in New York a real market. Yeah. So let's hope they meant that when they said it. So
yeah, which starts with removing the medical excise tax, because there's no other medicine in New York that is taxed the way medical cannabis is. Out-of-state reciprocity and a few other items that I know have been a long-standing agenda for MCIA and that we've been fighting for like years.
Yeah.
And struggling to have the legislature and the governor's office take those concerns seriously.
And to follow up on that point, what does a functioning medical market look like for the MCIA? Like, what are 3 or 4 salient details that you'd like the governor's office to really understand about how to make the market work?
I love how optimistic this question is, Katie.
Yeah, I get excited about this one because I could give you 30, right? But for the top 3,
we're trying to be educational.
Yeah,
I'll say that. So yeah.
No, it is a good question. We should think about these things.
It is a good question. So the barriers to entry in the medical program here in New York are still way too high for patients. Mm-hmm. So and too high for the operators, right? Which drives up the cost of medical cannabis here in New York, and then decreases the access points to patients. Because if it's so expensive to keep a medical dispensary open and you can't break even or ideally make money, then it's not a rational business decision to keep them open. And that's what we're seeing play out here in New York. So things that could be done that would fix that are, so there's first of all, eliminating the excise tax on medical cannabis. That's a no-brainer. Most states do that when they enact an adult use program. Here we are in New York, 4 years later, we still tax medical cannabis when we don't tax any other medicine in New York. Gov's office could have insisted on that in the budget if they really cared about the medical program. Another thing that is very low-hanging fruit is to authorize out-of-state reciprocity for patients, or reciprocity for out-of-state patients, I guess is the correct way of saying that. Most states, again, do that when you turn on adult use and you have a medical program. We have a huge commuter population, huge student population, lots of tourists here in New York State. I don't see a reason why out-of-state patients shouldn't be able to get their medicine here in New York. A major driver of the expense to the medical program here in New York is a mandate that pharmacists be employed and in person in order for a medical dispensary to be open to patients. Pharmacists are really, really expensive, and there's not a lot of flexibility there on that regulatory requirement. And so if we could get some flexibility on that regulatory requirement, whether that be virtual supervision or letting those pharmacists do more than just supervised dispensing, let them certify a walk-in patient, for example, that's walking in the doors with a qualified condition already diagnosed. So we stay away from that kind of third RAL, diagnostic authority scope of practice issue, and instead just allow them to say, like, yes, you're coming in, you are diagnosed with cancer. Here's my advice on medical cannabis that could mean something to you. Certify that walk-in patient on the spot. That would be a big groundbreaking change that would help. Last but not least, we could look at self-certification for patients in addition to that pharmacist certification. A couple markets do that, and that would be game-changing as well. Then there's lots of like nitty-gritty kind of wonky regulatory things that could be updated to make life easier for the medical operators. I could go on all day on that one, but things like aligning those testing standards. Right now, we've got the strictest testing standards in New York State's medical program. So I think it costs around $1,800 to get a SKU tested in the medical program. That's expensive. So the medical cannabis is expensive versus the adult use market. That's down to like $600, $700 to get a SKU tested to the adult use standard. So it's those types of things that make it so expensive for the ROs to do business here in New York. And I don't know that everyone really understands that or appreciates that level of detail that drives up their business costs vis-a-vis, a standalone adult use operator.
Right.
I feel like a lot of the time in New York, when you talk about the medical program, people think first of the ROs, and they don't remember that the ROs have never been the point of the medical program. They are a means to an end, and that is patients. Like, that is people who are struggling with very real health concerns, who find very real relief from having the access to these products, and who also like to be able to talk about this with a clinician on site and to know that their products, especially if you're immunocompromised, are meeting these safety standards and things like that. And so I think there is just a lot to be done to make this program actually work for the intended beneficiaries, and that that loss of focus on who this is supposed to serve and benefit has been apparent in the policy decisions that the state has made over the last few years.
Yeah. I mean, I'm burning with questions. It's a great discussion for cannabis policy nerds. I mean, if I could kind of interject my own, I guess, editorial bias into it a little bit, right? I do understand where people are coming from when they reject large out-of-state corporations from coming into the state. Like, I understand the impulse. At the same time, I think it's a really good point that you do need that level of capacity, the capital, to actually supply the medical market in a way that makes sense. Like, you need that organizational capacity. And I think that does get missed in the conversation very much.
I feel like a lot of times criticism is also very ahistorical, and like, you really can't critique a lot of these programs without going back into the politics and policy decisions that were being made at the very beginning, right? Because that is what you could get done when nobody understood what this was, right? When it was just patients and folks who like really, really cared about the issue, advocating for decades, right? And so like, the first things we got were not the best possible license structures, market structures, because everybody was making it up as they went along. And not all of the outcomes are purely for nefarious, evil reasons. It's just when you don't have a lot of information and when you have a really complicated policy, nobody gets it right the first time. I mean, corn's been around for millennia, and we still have to pass a farm bill every 5 years, right? And we're still legislating about agriculture all the time. And so I think we have to we have to give a little bit of grace to the policymakers who were doing the best they could with what they had at the time. But we also have to recognize that, like, in order to move forward, we can't be constantly relitigating the past. Like, we have to just deal with the reality we have right now and get the best possible outcome for the most number of stakeholders. And right now, I think it's really clear that there are some stakeholder groups that are really losing out in New York.
Are there looking outside of New York, are there states that have effectively struck this balance with their cannabis policy between the medical market, adult use market, social equity, business? Because it's like a seesaw a little bit in some respects.
I don't know that there's a state that I would point to that's checked all of those boxes, right, or gotten all of that correct. But there's examples on all of those fronts from neighboring states, right? So like New York is not the first one to go here, go on medical or adult use. It's not even close to the first. So talk about kind of operating in a bubble where you're not learning or using the data and the evidence you have at your fingertips. That's where I lose a lot of grace to decision makers. So do I give decision makers in New York grace for things that happened in 2015? Yes. In 2021, sure. 22, I'm still going to give you grace. This year, no way. You guys know better than what you just did, right? You know exactly what you just did. Right. So Massachusetts is interesting because they've managed to grow the medical program even after turning on the adult use program. So their patient count hasn't grown as rapidly as it was before adult use came online, but they still add patients every single year instead of losing patients. That makes Massachusetts very interesting to me. Another state that I think still has maintained a strong medical market is New Jersey. And I think Illinois has also managed to grow the medical market instead of shrinking it. And I hear and I think that Illinois is doing exciting things on social equity, though I know it's not perfect. I don't know if any state got that perfectly right. Yeah. I also don't know that New York did, right? So I think if you look at the licensing makeup and stats, we are doing well here, having SMBs succeed and have first market mover advantage. I will absolutely give the flowers to the regulators, both past and present, for pulling that off. That's hard to do. But what we don't have in New York, which made the cannabis law here in New York better than everyone else's cannabis law back in 2021, is the access to capital solution for the C qualified, for the social equity businesses. That was always supposed to be funded by the big giant fee that the ROs were gonna pay, right, for that vertical integration in adult use. None of that has happened. And I can assure you it's not happening now with a $15 million fee. So again, if they were motivated to solve that access to capital issue, then there's a real conversation about what that number should be. But at 15 million, they're just setting themselves up for more criticism for another failed attempt at a social equity fund.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I had three thoughts and I'm trying to one to go with. Yeah, I was just going to agree that I don't think any state has done it perfectly, right? It's just not, that doesn't really happen in policy and politics, because you do the best you can and then you have to clean up whatever unforeseen, mess or whatever you couldn't get done in that first bill. You got to come back and keep working on it. But I do think that New York made some very unforced errors. And you can see that in the just comparisons of different statistics. I think if you just look at the first 12 months of adult use sales between Maryland and New York, right, both kind of came online roughly close to each other, about the same stage of legalization and, across the whole country. And Maryland hit $1 billion in sales in the first 12 months. And it's a state that's a third the size of New York. It's taken New York 3 years to get to $1 billion in 12-month sales. It's very clear when you look at the numbers that while there are some good wins in New York for sure, there are also some missed opportunities. And that, did you really have to miss those opportunities to also get the wins that New York has? I don't think that all of these were choices to be made, that it was an either or. I think there was a lot more yes and that New York could have had in this transition.
Yeah. We're just coming up on time here. Katie, I know you mentioned that there was a lawsuit filed. For our viewers, what happens next, and where can they pay attention to the story as it unfolds?
It's a good question. I don't really have all the answers. I know that the codification of the fee hurts 2 of the 4 claims that the MCIA made in their litigation. Mm-hmm. The other 2 survive, if not get strengthened. We'll see. I don't think anyone's going to walk away from the litigation strategy, though. I think we'll all be able to kind of watch this play out in that setting.
Yeah. Katie, Ngiste, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have you back on again as the story unfolds. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for having us.
All of these stories and much, much more can be found on cultivated.news. Thank you, Jeremy, Ngiste, Katie, Boris Jordan from last week, and Lit Alerts for your insights this week. And most importantly, thank you for Dutchie for their support of This Week in Cannabis News, powered by Dutchie. Find out how to connect with them in the show notes. We'd love for you to follow us right here on LinkedIn or join us on YouTube and follow us there as well. Most importantly, get our newsletter in your inbox every single morning by visiting cultivated.news. Check back next Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here for This Week in Cannabis News, powered by Dutchie. Have a good and safe weekend, especially to our Canadian friends who are celebrating Victoria Day on Monday, affectionately known as May 2-4. Thanks, everybody.